All right. Good morning, everyone. It always takes a second for us to make sure we're online and everything is syncing. So you can give us a thumbs up or a like or a comment or something. Welcome on this Monday morning. I'm excited to bring April Dittmer back. All of you probably know April, but you might have noticed that the sign has changed and there's a different name on her card and on her email and on the building now. Welcome, April.
Thank you, Aubra. Thank you for having me. Yes, we do have a new name. It's GreenState Credit Union, and we're really excited about everything that's coming and everything that has come already. So all good things.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and I mean, I think people say this sometimes, and maybe it sounds like a cliche, but the sign might have changed, but the same people inside. When you walk in the door in any of the buildings, it's all the same people, and I'll say kind of the same process, but really a simpler process for you guys, right? For a lot of things.
Absolutely. That we're so excited about how much easier our lives are going to be on the loans, on the deposit side, CDs, all around. It's just going to be great for all of us. Yeah.
Yeah, super excited about, being able to make the mortgage application process simpler, the loan process simpler, all of that for all of us. So
Absolutely. For us and for the buyers.
right, absolutely. So, and that brings us up to something that, we were talking about recently and going through that process of, you found the right home, you already got pre-approved, you found the right home, and then you get to that home inspection. And we both had some deals lately where first, one of them paid for an appraisal and then had the inspection. And let's talk about that scenario a little bit and why, we don't advise that.
Yes. So the reason in this scenario, there wasn't any realtors on it. It was just attorneys. So, of course, I'm telling them, but I think when they hear from a realtor too, that kind of solidifies that you really do need a home inspection first. And the reason why is because a home inspection, if you're going to pay for, and if that comes back poorly, there's no sense in paying for an appraisal if the home inspection comes back bad, because a home inspection, you'll get that report within a day, typically two tops, whereas an appraisal report takes 2 weeks. So, and a home inspection report is much more thorough and detailed. So, if something will get flagged on a home inspection, that won't get flagged on an appraisal. So it's so important. The bank doesn't require a home inspection. We only require an appraisal to be done, but it is very important to get a home inspection so that you have somebody there that's really looking at all the little details, and then you can decide if it's a deal breaker or not.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I don't care if it's new construction or 100 years old, you're going to get a 20 or 30-page report of things. It's a matter of what are those things and were they things you didn't know about, things you weren't prepared to handle and that kind of stuff. But like April said, absolutely, our contract calls for the inspection getting done right away, then the appraisal, then we give our loan commitment, then we go to closing. That way you're not out that money. If God forbid you do, decide to cancel the deal or, something happens, you can't come to an agreement or something. So
Yes. And
yeah.
even new construction. I just had a brand new construction home, and they got a home inspection, and thank goodness they did. And yeah, they're not always going to be perfect, but sometimes you have to find that balance of, what comes up on a home inspection, if it's really worth losing your dream home over or not, depending on what it is, because sometimes those inspection reports can be very overwhelming for a buyer, but you really have to sit down and look at it and say, is this really a deal breaker, or is this something I can handle?
Well, and know that no house is perfect. So you might go to the next house and find a bigger list of items or, something that's more major. And then since we have a lot of housing stock that's older, we have a lot of houses built without GFI outlets or, without grounded 3-prong and, with older breaker panels and just things that are not today's standard, but they were built 50 years ago or 70 years ago or, whatever. And so they were built to that standard then, which of course, has changed. So definitely. Also brings up an interesting point. People say to me all the time, well, the appraiser, the appraiser goes this morning and, why don't we have that report tomorrow?
Mm.
let's talk about the real world in that, right?
Yes, absolutely. So no, the home inspection you will get back, like we said, in a day or two, but an appraisal takes much longer. Sometimes we can get them back pretty quick, depending on how busy the market is, and sometimes it takes a couple weeks. So the reason why too that an appraisal report takes so much longer is because the appraiser has to go out and find so many comps, they call it, which is so many comparable homes that compare to that home, whether it's a ranch, two-story, detached garage, attached garage, bi-level home, condo, there's things that they're going to look at because that's how they're going to come to a sales comparison approach value of the property. If there's a home that's 2 blocks down the street and it's identical and it went for $100,000 more, well, you're probably thinking, well, why did that happen? So to avoid something like that, they track that. They keep it all in a system, and that takes time to research and title and all of that. So it just takes a little bit longer. So another reason why it's so important to get your home inspection first.
And typically, even when you order a home inspection, let's say today, it might take a week before that home inspector even gets out there. So it's not even always just the reporting taking a couple, 2 or 3 weeks. It's the time of by the time they get it in their schedule, then get the report done. And so, and I'm also seeing that we just don't have a lot of appraisers anymore. I mean, there's just a shortage of appraisers like all industries, right? And so by the time they get it on their schedule, it's, we call today and they're like, okay, yeah, I can get you in next week, so
Yeah, definitely.
yeah. So we've seen a lot of that, and a lot of people just, are unsure of that process, and think, oh, well, the appraiser is going to get out there and, I'll be done tomorrow. No big deal.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So let's talk about something people always ask us about, and that's the grants. And so there is still grant funding available, or is there still grant funding available for down payment assistance and closing costs and things like that?
Yes, yep. So there's still, the USDA loans, which is a no down payment loan. And there's also grants. So absolutely, there's forgivable grants, which means they're forgiven over a certain period of time. There's some that'll give you a little more money if you pay them back at the end of your maturity date on your loan. There's some that'll give you even more money if you pay it back monthly, like a secondary loan. But absolutely, there's some grants that never run out. So there's always funding available for that, assuming you qualify. Of course, there's different rules and regulations for different types of financing, but yes, there's lots of grant funds available.
And these grants are not just for first-time home buyers, right?
Correct. Yes. So I'm so glad you brought that up because everybody always thinks there's two things that people always think. One, they always think they need 20% down. You do not need 20% down when you buy a home. Sometimes,
Matter of fact, very few people are putting 20% down because it is really not a huge benefit either. So
correct. Yes. Sometimes the PMI can be so cheap that it would just make more sense for you to hold on to that money in your account. And, if you end up paying it off, great. I know we don't have any prepayment penalties as long as it's not closed within 180 days. So every bank is different. Of course, I don't want to speak for other banks, but so if you end up paying it off early, great. The nice part about conventional financing is that PMI will automatically drop off the loan for you once you reach that 20% pay down. So absolutely, there's a lot of times where people just put down the minimum percent, and if they can pay it down quicker and easier, but that way they're not strapped. It always seems like the holidays are coming up, and it does seem like that tends to be the time when they call and, they're, Christmas and whatever else. So, don't strap yourself. Or don't put all your savings down if you don't have to.
right, right. And don't assume that you have to be a first-time home buyer to qualify for any of these grants and, and some of these options and things like that. So
Right. Yep. It could be your fifth or sixth home even, and you could still get the grant. Absolutely. As long as it's your primary home that you are living in, you can't get the grant if you're buying investment properties, but if you're buying a new primary home and it's your 10th home, you can still get the grant. So I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Right. Yep. And then one other big question we always get, and that's mortgage rates. And, we were talking about this, that, stock market fluctuates, the mortgage rate fluctuates. And so Friday you saw them go up. and you might have locked somebody in on Friday, and then today you came in and they'd come back down. And so then today you'll go back through and relock those people and lower their rate for them. And so just want to talk about that. People are always worried about what's the rate, what's the rate, what's the rate, and feel like they're shopping the rate or waiting for the rate or, whatever. And it changes hourly, right?
Yeah, it does. I always like that saying when I see date the rate, marry the home, because it's so true, because rates are very much up and down, especially right now. And, Friday afternoon was one of those things where I did see a spike. And then this morning I come in and they're down again. So the nice part about us is that if we lock in your interest rate and then the rates go down during the process, we can renegotiate that rate for lower at any time during the process, you know, without giving like the last week of closing, because by then I'd like to have everything buttoned up, for the loan. But yeah, absolutely. I do it all the time. I'd say right now I'm doing it almost constantly because the rates are so up and down. So every morning when I have a contract going, I'll just check them every morning and see if I can get somebody that lower interest rate. It's free for you, and it helps the customer, and that way they get the lowest rate possible.
Right. Absolutely. So like I said, so people a lot of times are like, oh, I'm going to wait until, the rate goes back down a little bit or whatever. And that's not helpful. Shop, like you said, shop for the house you love, and you're going to find the rate, and the loan and everything to work out once, it all works out. So yeah, definitely. All right. I think I just want to reiterate to people, different name on the sign, same people inside.
Yes.
So, don't feel like, you might have an email for April, it still goes to April. You might have an old phone number, it still goes to April. You might have a link to do the mortgage application, still goes to April. So, you're still getting the same service, the same person, the same, options and things like that. And I think eventually you'll be getting more, but, that's still to come, and we're still learning about that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. Same people, we're still here. We're still more than happy to help you. You still know where to find me, same office. So yes, please reach out if you have any questions.
Yep. So I appreciate everybody's time. If you have questions or comments or anything like that, you can message either of us. You can put a comment below. You can call us or text us. We'll have all of our information here, below. And just appreciate everybody's time, and happy Monday. Hopefully everybody has a great week. And I can't believe we are to Labor Day weekend this weekend. So happy Labor Day, everybody.
Thank you, Aubra.
Thank you.